so much for joining, Nathan. I really, really appreciate your time. I'm super, super excited to have you on the show. And I can't wait for us to kind of, deep dive into some of these issues we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm excited about being with you. I appreciate you having me on your podcast today.
Awesome. So Nathan, can you just tell our Dwell listeners a little bit about yourself and just kind of like what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, so I got involved in real estate 11 years ago, specifically flipping apartments. I've done a 12 unit to 121 unit. I've also been involved in other various businesses from emails, sent a little bit over 1 billion emails, website companies, buy here, pay here, car lot, consulting company. So serial entrepreneur, just you name it. And I've kind of done it. If it didn't involve, porn or gambling or liquor, something like that, I've kind of stayed out of that area.
Good idea.
Serial entrepreneur, but I flipped over $52 million worth of multifamily real estate in the last 11 years. So that's been a huge focus of, how do you find them? How do you fix them? How do you flip them? What's the nuts and bolts? Because what I learned, starting out and doing something, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to make mistakes. And me being me and me being like most everyone else, it's like, oh, well, this is easy. I can do this. And the first deal I made a little over $252,000 on. The second deal I lost a little over $150,000 on. So I kind of, about 2 years ago, I wrote a book, How to Find, Finance, Fix, and Flip Apartments from duplexes to 100 plus complexes, to go out and start helping others. Not that I still make mistakes all the time. If you read my bio, I say amazing successes and epic failures. If I can help someone avoid some of those failures, then, that's a good thing, right?
Right. So before we even jump in some of these really, really cool deals that you've done in the past, why real estate?
So the reason for real estate, a guy walked into my office a little over 11 years ago and said, hey, I have an 18-unit complex that I have to sell within 30 days. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. I had bought literally one home at the time. It was a starter home, 2,200 square feet. I had sold it and bought the second home that I'm currently in. It's a little larger, a little more space, but I'd never flipped anything. My dad had been a painter growing up, and we had done some renovations on things. So I went to the bank, and now at this point I had owned one business that had generated a little over 80 million in sales in 6 years with my brother. So I had really good banking relationships. But I went to the first bank and they said no. And I went to the second bank and they said no. I went to the third bank and the fourth and the fifth bank, and 5 banks said no. The fifth one said, hey, go down to this little, at the time it was Lexington State Bank. They've now been absorbed multiple times, and present this to this gentleman named Jack Smith. But what was interesting at the time, I'd never done real estate, so I had no track record. I had relationship with bankers from other industries, but the presentation, how I presented it, wasn't the issue. The issue was those first 5 banks, they didn't do full renovations. They didn't do high deferred maintenance. They didn't do high occupancy issued complexes. But at the time, they didn't tell me that. They just said no. So I thought it was me. So I went to this Jack Smith, sat down. He said, hey, bring your wife and a 1-year tax return. This is 2006, 7. So I went and met with Jack, and I talked to him for like 5 minutes. And he asked me just random questions, really nothing to do with the property. I'd already sent him the portfolio, the performance, and how much it needed to be renovated and that. And 5 minutes into it, I'm not in a swivel chair, but he just turns around and puts his back to my wife and I. So here we are sitting across his desk, been turned down 5 times. I turned to my wife and I was like, hey, kind of mouthing to her, what should we do? Do we say thanks and leave? And so we sat there for about another 5 minutes, and he turned around and handed me a sheet of paper and said, here, we can close within 30 days, 100% financing, 100% renovation.
Wow. Wow. That is a fascinating story. I mean, there's so many things I want to touch on. I want to touch on when you said you flipped. I was expecting I flip homes, but you said flip multifamily. I want to touch on that. And then you also mentioned that Jack Smith said, come with your wife,
In
to the
1 year
bank
tax return.
and 1 year tax return, not, a bucket of other documents. So let's first jump into that because you were just on that story. What was that about?
Well, so, and that really doesn't exist anymore. Banking used to be based on relationships. And Jack was not at the end of his career. He was still a young man. He was in his mid 60s, but he had worked at Bank of America and other commercial banks. He had underwritten or been involved in the underwriting of over $40 billion worth of commercial notes. And he ends up at this little community bank who hires him to be their commercial. Did I lose you there for a second? Hold on, I've lost sound, so I don't know if that's. Let me do a.
Oh, no, sorry. No, I was just saying that. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I'm on the right network. So
Okay, yeah, no, I think you were talking about like how he's been with the
just
bank
hit a beep there. And all right, is that better now?
Yep.
So Jack placed more value in the person. I guess he was looking, what did they look like in their eyes? How did they talk? How did they carry themselves? How did they treat their spouse? I mean, at the time, I didn't think about all of this, but it was more for him. It was a $500,000 deal. That's a lot of money. But for him, he wanted to see who I was and how I treated my wife and what she thought about me, because those were the questions. So, he came in and did the deal for us. Within 30 days, I had gone back to him, and there was a 12 unit right behind.
Wow.
And it had been split when setback rules were right. And so I went back to him. I said, well, there's a 12 unit, and it was on one road. There was only the 18 unit and the 12 unit. So he financed the 12 unit, 100% renovation, 100% financing. So from start to finish, from the time I closed the first deal, in 8.5 months, I renovated, stabilized, rented out. So didn't stabilize in the 2 year, but filled up the complex to 95% occupancy and sold it through LoopNet. So didn't pay any broker fees in 8.5 months.
Wow. Fascinating. Fantastic. So can you walk us through the numbers? And then I want to jump back. I'm sorry, I'm going to jump back to you just, going directly into flipping.
So, the numbers, I'll be honest with you, at the time, I didn't know what a cap rate was, and I got busted on that by a friend. Food Lion, Food Lion's a big grocery chain in the Southeast. And my friend developed about 55 of those. She's retired now, but I had gone to an event at her house the day after I closed the complex. So I'm riding high, got all this money and a first deal, hot shot, too big for my britches. And she looks at me and she said, hey, what was the cap rate? And immediately I went, kind of in my mind, I'm like, cap rate. The roof comes together like this. And there's these little ridge vents, but those, and she immediately, I've known her for about 20 years. She said, please tell me you didn't buy by this time it was about a $600,000 deal without knowing what the cap rate is. And I said, I'll be honest with you, I don't even know what a cap rate is. So when I say I did my first deal and I didn't know. So, but what I did know, and this is why the banks bought into it, which I was running a cap rate, I just didn't know it. I mean, you had 30 vacant units. They were going to rent for $500 each a month. It's going to create this much income. It's going to times 12. So I knew the principles of business minus the income. And then I listed it on LoopNet for sale. So, I mean, I knew what a cap rate was. I just didn't know it was a cap rate.
Correct.
And in the numbers, so, the way I do now, I didn't know it at the time, what I was doing, but the way I do things now is I run numbers backwards. Most people run numbers forward, but you can't increase the value of a property, whether it's a house, vacant land, complex, strip mall, whatever it is, unless the area will hold the value. So, you're in the Baltimore area. I'm in the Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Greensboro area. There are areas in town where rents are $500 a month, and it might be 3 blocks. It might be a 3-mile radius. There are areas where rent's $2,000 a month, and it might be 3 blocks or 3-mile radius or some, configuration there. At that $500 a month, there's not much you can do to bring it up to $700, $800, or $900 a month.
Absolutely.
Even if the unit is renovated to that level because of the area where it's located. What's around it? What's the crime stats? What's the schools like? I mean, you start throwing in all the variables that you don't control. So too often I find people who call me and they're in a bind because they went and bought a house or they bought an apartment and they put in too high-end countertops, cabinets, flooring. Now they're trying to get 20, 30, 40% over market value, and the market's rejecting them. So, when I run my numbers, I look at what, on a conservative day, what could this property be worth?
And then do you match your finishes for the renovations to match that, right? And
so then I take out renovations plus 20% for oops or mistakes or unseens, right? The floor underneath the toilet is rotten, but you didn't see it, you didn't catch it. Little things like that can become big things. And then I subtract broker fees and any fees that are, taxes that might be owed or things like that. I subtract what I want to make. And then that's the purchase price. When you run your numbers that way, if you make a mistake, you're going into your profit. But if you run it on the high end, or you run what you think it should be worth, you can end up in a horrible situation where you've paid too much, you've put too much money in. Now the market doesn't hold the value. What do? You cry uncle. I mean, because there's nothing you can do.
Right. So definitely now we have to go back. So you were in your office, somebody came and say, hey, I've got an 18 unit. I need to sell in 30 days. You've never done a multifamily deal. For a lot of people today, or maybe even listening to our conversation, they might be thinking, wow, I mean, I've never even flipped a deal or ever done a real estate deal. Or, I mean, I might have business experience, but I've never done this. How were you able to, what was your thought process on taking down such a new and somewhat big idea and breaking it down, actually executing on that idea?
So this is, you have to internally check yourself. You have to position yourself in what you're doing. Here's the reason why I did the deal. It could have been a smaller house. It could have been, whatever it is. But what's the number one thing that holds people back from doing something?
Fear.
I've never met you before until this. I mean, we talked via email, but I've never asked you that question, and you've never asked me that question. It's fear. So it's not about really the deal that I did. It's the point that the fact is I did the deal because I looked at what were my risks, what were my rewards, and I put the effort and the time and the diligence and the determination into doing it. I've met real estate investors who have taken every course underneath the planet. They've spent $2,500. I met a guy the other day had spent $80,000 on 3 different educational programs. Do you know how many deals he had done?
0
deals. I was like, dude, for $80,000, you could have flipped a 3 or 4 deal, 20% down. You could have done multiple deals. I said, I'll charge you half of that if you want me to help you.
Right.
The thing is you got to run your numbers. You got to know that. And I knew the area. So I had that advantage. I'm from this area. Well, I grew from 12 years old. So I knew the area. Just do it. Nike had the great slogan, Michael Jordan and all that is, if you don't ever try, you can't fail. Well, you will fail, but you won't fail at trying. You'll fail because you never tried.
So I really love that. I would just do it. I really love that. So you did the 18 unit, you did the 12, then you went larger. So going large is, that's a next level of fear.
Well,
right?
so the next deal I did was actually 24 units. So it was in the same size. I bought it, closed on it, $225,000 deal, fully vacant. Went to pull my building permits, and it wasn't zoned right. So there were two buildings, and they had been separated out. I bought one, and a church had the other. What I didn't realize is my attorney and my surveyor had said it was grandfathered in, but when they had split the properties, the setback, the fire code was 25 feet from corner to corner when those buildings were built, but the current code was 40 feet. So here I am, my attorney has told me, and a surveyor has told me that I'm good to go. So, everything I do now, before I even really start seriously looking at a property, I call the zoning department. I get a letter on letterhead signed. This is zoned properly. Because what ended up happening, I had to hold that property for 18 months. But at the time when it started, I didn't know it was going to be 18 months. It was just a daily, I had to either tear half the building down. I had to build another parking lot. I had to buy the other building. There were all these options. Well, what ended up happening is I had to buy the other building, 1/10 of an acre, had to wait for the city to condemn it and tear it down, had to put in another parking. I spent $150,000 that I hadn't planned on. But when I started it, I didn't know how much I was going to have to spend, and I didn't know how long it was going to take because of, one thing that I should have known, but I didn't. But, I've taken and looked at, multiple courses and been in, at conferences and stuff. And I've never heard anybody talk about zoning. I hear them talk about zoning for building. If you're going to build something, it has to be zoned right. I'm serious. If I look at, a friend calls me and say, hey, I'm looking at a small house or land or, huge. First thing I do is say, call the zoning department. They're like, why? I was like, just trust me. And I tell them the story if they want to hear it, but don't ever buy anything if you personally don't have in writing from the zoning department, not an email, not a verbal conversation, because none of that is binding. It has to be on the county of Forsyth or Baltimore County. Baltimore's in Baltimore County, right?
Baltimore is Baltimore City, and then we've got Baltimore County.
Yeah. So, whichever your zoning is from, you need a letterhead with somebody of authority signing off on that.
That is I've never heard that too, actually. So that set you back $150K. That's a lot of money.
Lot of money.
How
they say
did you?
They say pride goeth before a fall. So, here I am riding high on the first one. I got smacked down for the second one, probably.
How did you get back up?
So again, then it becomes, mitigating, being determined. If you want to do something, too many times today, people take the attitude, I do at times myself, oh, well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, or that meeting didn't go right, or they didn't hire me, or they said no, or, I can't find any investors. Well, have you put an investor packet together? Have you put a business plan together? Because a lot of people will run out and ask 10 people for money. Nobody will give it to them, but they don't have a plan. So the way I got back up is I just kept going. There was no other option. So, every day I was working on other solutions. I was, asking questions. Too many times we get in a bind and we feel like that if we ask questions, people are going to think that we don't know what we're doing. Well, guess what? They already know that we don't know what we're doing, because if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't be in the bind we're in. Kept working on and eventually got through it.
So you did get through it. So I think now we can kind of a little bit shift into like just balance, right? Like you've got all these properties, you've got speaking event. I saw some of your videos on your site. How do you actually balance, all the balls in the air? How do you kind of keep everything in control and still find, time to spend with, family or friends? How do you do that?
Yeah. So, for a number of years, I didn't. I'm 44, and to the age of 40, I did in my 30s, pretty miserable job of balancing life and family and faith with work and faith. I kind of separated everything out. Everything was in compartments. God was my faith. God was here. picket fence, and then, business, and then another picket fence, and life. But the thought process that I was in, and the thought process that I hear and see from a lot of folks, goes like this. If I can make more money, I'll have more time to spend with my family and my faith. What happens is the more money you make, the more money you spend. The more money you spend, the less time you spend with your family and your faith, because you have to work harder to make more money. So if you want to do, avoid what I did, I woke up at 40, owned 13 businesses, but was miserable because I wasn't right with my wife. I wasn't out doing anything bad. I wasn't out, drinking. I wasn't out cheating on her. None of that. I just wasn't spending the quality time with her that I should. I wasn't spending the time I should with my daughter, and I wasn't involved with my faith the way I should, because every time we went on vacation or we were hanging out. Are you here? Are you here? Oh, hold on one second.
For those on the audio that can't see this, Nathan has got his phone right on his face as he's looking at me. Well, as he's looking at his phone.
But I just stopped talking to you. I didn't.
Correct.
And we do that to our spouses. We do that to our business partners. We do that to our friends. We're out to dinner, and bring up my phone again. We're out to dinner and we're talking.
By the way.
Yeah. So, here's another Facebook message. Hey, hold on one second. Let me respond. And I'm at Disney and I'm walking 10 feet behind my wife on my phone, working on a deal so I can make money so I can come back to Disney again. But I'm at Disney, so why not enjoy it?
It's crazy. I just love the way you put that. I've never heard it like that ever. That is just, I can't wait for you to unpack that a little bit more.
Well, so the unpacking is spend time with your family or your friends or your personal life, have that in balance, spend time with your faith, have that as your foundation. So if you look at this as a spoke, a wheel, an old timey wheel. So your faith is in the center. And then out of the center comes all the other aspects of your life. You, your spouse, if you're married, or your friends or your family, your health. I'll email you a picture. I was 42 pounds overweight. I looked like somebody had just blown me up. Oh,
wow.
I was, and I felt horrible, and my temperament was bad. And, I always had the thought that everyone else is stupid. They're idiots. It was always everything always ended up in an argument, whether I was at eating dinner or on a business deal. It ended up in some form or fashion from a small to a large argument. And in my mind, it was always their fault. So if you're at a point where, everyone else is idiots and stupid and dumb and they don't understand what you're saying, it's not them.
Guess what?
It was me. Watch you. So then you got your finances, how you deal with your money. And then you have your faith. And what happens in life, if you're out of balance in one area, you're out of balance in everything. It's like having a splinter in your finger. It's a less than a 1% area of your body, but it disrupts everything that you do. The root canal, you got a bad tooth, another small area, ear infection. It throws everything off. So if you're over here and your work is killing it and you're doing great, but your child's not getting any quality time with you, eventually what you do at work won't matter, because your child won't know you and you won't have a relationship with them. And you'll wake up one day and go, who are they? And they've been thinking for years, who are you? Same thing with your wife, same thing with your health. So it really comes down to if your foundation is not right, if the center of your will is not right, and then you're not managing every area of your life the way you should, money's not going to solve those problems.
So I'm like a dual listener. I'm like, oh my goodness, I like what Nathan is saying. Couple of questions. First one, What would you tell your 10 years younger self, your 34-year-old self? And two, what's the one thing, as a listener, can I do today to get this balance you're talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, at 30, if I could go back, I would apply what I already knew. I mean, most everything that I know now, as far as balance in life and how to deal with things, I knew then. I knew I shouldn't have been focused on money as the number one goal. I knew I should have treated people better. I knew I should have put better infrastructure in. So, if I could go back 10 years, it really wouldn't be that I would, read a bunch of books or take a bunch of courses or that. It would just be, I would do what I already knew I should have been doing. And that's the thing about the human mind and where we are. Most people know what they should be doing, but it's like, oh, that path is hard. But the path we're on is hard too. And it's not going to get us to the goal. It's not going to get us the results that we want. So then we end up, we're just miserable at work. We're miserable at home. We're miserable at whatever we're doing because we're not doing it the right way. But we're doing it. We're working hard. We're working 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. We're doing everything that we should do. We're just doing them in the wrong order. And if you don't do things in the right order, you're not going to get the result. So if I came walking out on a stage to speak and my undies, my Superman underwear were on the outside of my pants, what would people think?
That's interesting.
I put them on. I'm wearing my underwear and I'm wearing my pants. But what does it look like? Looks funny, looks weird, odd. Probably not going to ever ask me back to come speak again. So that's, equivalent to our life. If we're not laying things in the right order and doing them, it took me the same amount of time to put them on right versus putting them on wrong. Same amount of work, same amount of time, same amount of everything, but the result was different, right?
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. I really, really love that.
So that's what happened in my life. So if I could go back and do things different, I would do them in order. So to any advice to anyone today, if you're not getting the results you want out of your life, whether it's in real estate or relationships or just your own personal, your health, you want to feel better. If you want to feel better, I used to drink 12 to 18 Cokes a day, 5 pounds of sugar every 4 days of a bag, plus all kinds of other. If you want to feel better, eat better.
Sounds simple, right? Sounds simple.
You're still eating, and hey, I love vanilla ice cream with Hershey's syrup on it. I love sugary cereals. So I still eat junk. I just don't eat it, but I don't eat as much as I used to. Moderation.
Right.
So if I could, any advice today, and I there's many things out there, the various books, self-help books and all that come up. I came up with one that for me was in my life. Basically, I called it the law of order. Do things in the order they should be done. If you don't, you get chaos. If you do, you get balance. So the first step in that is if you're not getting the result you want, or if you're trying to grow your business and it's not growing, sit down and just identify what's the problem. If you're not getting any real estate investors, do you have a real estate packet? Do you have an investor packet? A lot of times we run to people and say, hey, will you invest money with me? What you do right there is you open up a bank of questions that shouldn't be asked. Where do you want to do it? How much money are you going to, so many simple. So if you're going to go to somebody and ask them for money, you need to go with a plan. Hey, I want to buy this house, or I want to buy a house or in this area, or a duplex or an apartment in this area. It's going to cost $100,000 and I need $20,000. And, based off of comps, we could potentially make up to $30,000. Same amount of time to ask that person for it, but you give them the information. So to anybody today looking at wanting to find balance in their life, time's going to pass. You're going to work hard. You're going to do all those things. Just do them in the right order. You know, I am convinced that technology is by far one of the greatest things in the history of mankind. I just had neck surgery. They replaced a C6 and C7 disc 2 months ago, cured a bunch of nerve pain I was having. I'm also convinced that technology is one of the worst things that has ever happened to an individual, to the family, to friends, to interactions that has ever existed. I had a friend of mine, it was a year ago, Valentine's Day, client of mine, he called me on the February 15th. He said, I had the worst date my wife and I've ever had. He said, I don't know why. He said, I took home flowers. I was on time, took her to a really nice restaurant. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there, CJ. I said, I know what happened. He said, how? I said, I know. I said, you took your phone in with you and you sat it down on the table, and every 5 minutes you picked it up and looked at it. And I said, she was talking. And so you kind of side-eyed her. Those on the radio, you can't see. I'm looking at my phone side-eyed and looking back. And then you put it down. And I said, so in an hour's dinner that you paid, almost $100 for, 10, 15 times you interrupted her and said, without saying, that there was someone more important to you than her. I said, no, I'm shocked she didn't get up and leave in the middle and go get an Uber or a taxi and go home.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's really, really fascinating, the power of technology for good and for bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're sitting here doing this podcast. You've been kind enough to bring me on. There are emergencies. I know if my wife calls twice back to back, she needs me. But, if I were here doing this or you were doing your end, and all of a sudden we start, responding to emails or talking to someone else, and it's not an emergency, it's rude. It's disrespectful. Some people disagree with this, and that's okay. As my daddy used to say, everybody's wrong every once in a while. If you want respect from someone, even in business, in your personal life, give respect first. Don't expect for someone to give you respect if you're not respecting them. And, a lot of people say, oh, well, people should respect me. No, you respect other people. And then if they don't respect you, you know what? That's on them.
Absolutely.
This is how I feel about that. If someone doesn't want to respect you, don't work with them. Don't spend time with them. If they're your wife or your spouse, you're going to have probably a bigger conversation. But if you don't, you're eventually going to end up, disliking each other, sleeping in separate rooms, or divorced because you can't sit down and talk about your issues.
As much as I love to keep going, we're definitely dwelling into the quick round. So these are going to be like quick questions.
Hey, so real quick on the quick things. Just do what you want to do. Stop being afraid. Stop reading all the books and doing all that and planning. Put a plan together and do it. All right.
Love it. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. So first question, you ready?
Yes.
What is unique about Nathan? So what separates you from the next guy or the next gal?
For me is vulnerability. I don't mind sharing. I used to. I had a problem with it, but I don't mind sharing with someone, my fears, my concerns, mistakes I've made. I've learned, looking back, most of the mistakes I made could have been avoided had I went and sought counsel from someone else.
Nice. Second question. What was the last book that you read, and what was the one thing that you picked up from the book?
So I read mostly Proverbs. I've read a ton of books over the years. And I realized something. Every self-help book, every leadership book, all of them out there, all basically come out of Proverbs. They've just been repackaged, repositioned, but Proverbs talks about how you deal with, your mouth and your temper, to how you deal with business. So I constantly just reread Proverbs, Proverbs 1 on day 1 through the end of the month.
Right. There was an interview with Larry King. I can't remember the author's name, but he has a book, I think The Richest Man That Ever Lived.
Yes.
I can't remember that book.
About Solomon. So Ecclesiastes is good too.
Right. A little bit depressing on the beginning, but it gets better at the end.
Well, if you take the principles of Solomon and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, I mean, you've got everything that you need to know about how to be yourself and walk in a good light.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Last question. You've got all these activities going on. You're speaking events. You've got a real estate investment. What do you do for fun?
Oh, so I spend time with my family. My daughter loves Marvel movies and TV shows, and we go hiking, and we go. I love to tube or kayak down streams. I don't like anything that's too rough. Nice slow thing down through there. I shoot to go to the shooting range every once in a while. So I balance that out, and people say, well, how do you manage that? Time management is important. I have a calendar that's shared with my family, and I block out times where people can't book times, they can't book meetings. Those are the no-go zones.
Makes sense.
There's nothing else that's more important than that time.
Makes sense.
And so what happens is when we don't schedule out our week, we end up at the end of the week having done a lot, but not really anything that mattered.
Right.
Last thing on this, the things that matter, the things that are hard, or the things that we perceive to be hard, we procrastinate on, and we wait to do them, and we wait and we wait and we wait. But in actuality, if we'll just do it, it's not as hard as you think it is. Speaking to myself here, because I'm a procrastinator. The only way to overcome that is put on your schedule, by this time, by this date, I'm going to have this done.
I love that. If I'm a dual listener and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a great episode. I really like what Nathan is saying. How do I get connected and, follow Nathan? Where are you most active? How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can go to Nathan Tabor, and that's NathanTab as in boy, or.com. And then from there, there's links off to the real estate. There's links off to my personal story, the work-life balance programs. Most of the materials I have, are free. I do coaching and consulting. There's a cost to that, but most all this I've talked about. There's books and guides that can be downloaded. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Nathan. It was an absolute pleasure. I learned so much myself, and hopefully can't wait to bring you back sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Anytime. I appreciate you letting me be on it. Hey, and thanks for being willing to talk about faith and business and life, because they do all go together.
Absolutely.
A lot of people don't want to discuss them together, but they fit very well together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
You as well.